apartment. Hello?
I'm Anthonette Cayedito.
Okay, whereabouts in Albuquerque? Hello? Anthonette, where are you?
Welcome back to Solvable Mysteries Podcast. My name is Uras, and this week we're going to be discussing the mysterious disappearance of Anthonette Cayedito. Anthonette Cayedito is a Native American girl who disappeared from her home in Gallup, which is located in New Mexico. It's a border town very close to the border of Arizona. Anthonette disappeared during early morning hours of Sunday, April 6th, back in 1986. At the time of this recording, it's been over 35 years that Anthonette Cayedito has been missing. She was 9 years of age at the time of her disappearance. Some of her physical and biographical characteristics include that at the time of her disappearance, she was a student. She stood at 4 foot and 7 feet height. Her weight was around 55 pounds. She's described as a Caucasian/Native American female, minor, with brown hair and brown eyes. She has moles on her right cheek, nose, ankle, and back. She has scars on her knee as well as on her lip. Both of her ears are pierced. Anthonette also wore eyeglasses. She was born on December 25th, 1976, to Penny Cayedito, a woman of the Navajo Nation, and a man named Larry Estrada. She also had 2 younger sisters, Wendy, who was 5 years of age at the time of her disappearance, as well as Sadie, who was 7 years of age at the time of Anthonette's disappearance. There are conflicting reports on who exactly Anthonette's biological father is, because if you go to Wikipedia, it states that a man named Anthony Montoya is her father. However, law enforcement have specified that a man named Larry Estrada is actually her biological father. It's speculated that the previously mentioned man, Anthony Montoya, could be the father of Anthonette's younger sister Wendy, and possibly Sadie. At the time of Anthonette's disappearance, this man, Anthony Montoya, who could be the biological father of Anthonette's younger sisters, had also separated from Penny, just as Larry Estrada had done some time earlier. Now, after Penny and Anthony Montoya separated, Anthonette and her 2 younger sisters were raised by their mother Penny in Gallup, New Mexico, the border town that I've mentioned earlier. Anthonette was described as being a level-headed, wise, beyond her years, dedicated, friendly, caring, and dependable. By the time she was 6 years old, Anthonette was already cooking for her sisters, ironing their clothes for the week, and played a vital role in caring for them. She was known by her peers for her displayed concern for the well-being of others. Her youngest sister later described Anthonette as having a, quote, caregiver's heart. At the time of her disappearance, Anthonette was a 4th grade student at Lincoln Elementary School, where she was an above-average student, displaying a flair for sports and physical activities. Outside of school, Anthonette also displayed a strong interest in her weekly Bible studies and was devoted to her religious faith. Anthonette disappeared in the early morning hours, sometime between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. on April 6, 1986. That evening, her mother, Penny, had been out with friends at a local bar and had left Anthonette and her 2 younger sisters with a babysitter. Now, I believe that it's unknown to the public who the babysitter was, and oddly enough, this babysitter is rarely mentioned in reports about this case. I do believe that this babysitter was actually identified by law enforcement, because I don't see how law enforcement would just let this crucial detail slip. Penny had returned from her night out sometime at midnight and had sent the babysitter home. Now, the following morning, when Penny awoke to prepare the girls for Bible school, she realized that Anthonette was not in her room. After inquiring with neighbors, she had to call the police and report her missing. At first, Penny had suspected that Anthonette was out with some other kids from the neighborhood looking for a local dog that had gone missing recently. However, at around 11 a.m. in the morning hours, she realized that that was not the case and that Anthonette was definitely not around anymore. According to some sources, two different neighbors had told law enforcement that they had seen an older model brown truck with New Mexico license plates parked next to the Cayedito residence on the night when Anthonette disappeared. They also told law enforcement they saw a man getting out of the truck and approaching the house. Apparently, this did not cause concern for the neighbors initially because random people would sometimes show up at the house. Apparently, this was a regular occurrence for the Cayedito residents. A crucial breakthrough in this disappearance case came 5 years later when Wendy, Anthonette's youngest sister, who at the time of her disappearance was just 5 years of age, now she was aged 10, she gave her account of the events of the night for the first time to law enforcement. According to Wendy, there had been a knock on the door around 3 a.m. at night. Both of the girls were still awake, and Anthonette was the one who answered the door. When Anthonette asked who was there, the knocker identified himself as Uncle Joe. When Anthonette opened the door, she was grabbed by two men. She was kicking and screaming. She was shouting out, "Let me go, let me go." The men forced her into a brown van. Wendy didn't recognize the men. She didn't get a good look at their faces. Wendy stated that she had not said anything for the last 5 years, owing to a fear of upsetting her mother as well as not being believed. This is a very perplexing case because there are not a lot of facts, but there are a lot of rumors. For example, it's reported by some sources that Penny and Anthonette, let's remember Penny is Anthonette's biological mother, it's reported that both of them had stayed up talking until 3 a.m. that night. Now, if that's the case, it's quite strange how her mother Penny did not hear the knock on the door of the abduction or the abduction itself. Also, there are speculations that there was not just one knock, there were a couple of knocks on the door. I would like to read a snippet from a Reddit post that I found. Now, once again, I cannot confirm that this is verified information, but I've seen this floating around on at least a couple of sources, so I think I want to read this to you. And it goes like this. Shortly after the abduction, Anthonette's younger sister, who was 7 at the time, Sadie, told Larry Estrada, who was, I believe, Sadie's and Anthonette's biological father, that alleged, as well as the police department, that she and Anthonette heard someone knocking on the front door. Anthonette either asked who it was, and neither of them recognized the man and or his voice. Shortly thereafter, Sadie heard a second knock. Sadie didn't leave her bedroom, but stated she heard a man and a woman identifying themselves as aunt and uncle instruct Anthonette to open the door, citing how cold it was outside. Nearly 5 years after Anthonette's disappearance, her other younger sister, Wendy, then came forward and introduced for the first time that after the second knock, she accompanied Anthonette to the front door and said Uncle Joe came to the door, ending her statement with, "Suddenly, two men abducted her sister, but she didn't recognize either one of them." Now, Sadie told about two different knocks when she, told what happened shortly after the disappearance, and she said that she accompanied Anthonette the first time. However, she didn't say that Wendy accompanied Anthonette at any point, not during the first knock or the second knock, but Wendy came forward 5 years later saying that she did accompany Anthonette during the second knock on the door. So once again, this is where things just don't really add up. Did Wendy actually accompany Anthonette to the door? She was 5 years of age at that point. Does she really remember what happened? Or could this scenario just developed in her head and maybe she now believes that this is exactly what happened? Once again, it's so hard to tell here because we don't really have any facts. We have a lot of rumors in this case. 1 year after Anthonette's disappearance, the Gallup Police Department received a frantic phone call in which a young girl claimed to be Anthonette Cayedito. In the call, she said she was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I will play this audio clip for you right now.
Police department. Hello.
I'm Anthonette Cayedito. I'm Anthonette Cayedito.
Okay, whereabouts in Albuquerque?
Who said it could use a phone?
Hello? Anthonette, where are you? Police department. Hello?
I'm Anthonette Cayedito. I'm Anthonette Cayedito.
Okay, whereabouts in Albuquerque?
Who said it could use a phone?
Hello? Anthonette, where are you?
This call did in fact happen, and someone called the Gallup Police Department and made this call. The call sounds fairly disturbing. Before the girl could reveal her full whereabouts, an angry adult voice was heard shouting, "Who said you could use the phone?" following by the girl screaming and the sounds of a scuffle, and the phone call was then cut off. Cayedito's mother, Penny, believed that the voice did belong to her daughter, but she did not recognize the adult's voice from the 911 call. If the girl was in Albuquerque, as this person who called the Gallup Police Department insisted, then it's strange because this phone call was made to the Gallup Police Department. The police tried to trace the call, but they were unsuccessful. It's also fairly bizarre because this was not a 911 call. This was actually a call to the non-emergency phone number of the Gallup Police Department. I've took a look at the non-emergency phone numbers for the Gallup Police Departments. Is a very long and a very specific number that it would be strange for a 10-year-old child to just remember. And also, if Anthonette was in Albuquerque, why would she try to call Gallup Police Department? Another thing worth mentioning is that law enforcement claims that this call lasted for 40 seconds, but we only have 28 seconds because only this portion of the call has been released to the public. So it makes analyzing this call a little bit more tricky because we do not know what's on that call for an additional 12 seconds. Another widely reported potential sighting of Anthonette happened in 1991. This is 5 years after her disappearance. Shortly before this sighting was reported, an age-progressed photograph of Anthonette was released to the public, and following that, a waitress at a restaurant in Carson City, Nevada, came forward believing that she had seen Anthonette at the restaurant. This waitress claims to have encountered a teenage girl matching Anthonette's description in the company of two unkempt couple, a man and a woman. The girl continuously knocked her utensils to the floor, seemingly attempting to get the waitress's attention. According to the waitress, the girl grabbed her hand and squeezed it firmly each time the waitress handed back the utensils after picking them up from the floor. Now, after the trio left, the waitress cleaned their table and found a napkin under the plate the girl had been eating from. Now, this napkin contained two brief messages, "Help me" and "Call the police" written on it. The only thing that connects this particular sighting to Anthonette's disappearance is the fact that the waitress claims that the girl who was, sitting with a couple in the restaurant matched the description of Anthonette's aged, progressed images, which, to my belief, is probably a pretty weak connection. There's nothing concrete connecting Anthonette to this particular sighting, in my opinion. Let's remember that Wendy, Anthonette's youngest sister, 5 years after Anthonette's disappearance, claims that the man behind the knocking of the door on their house back when Anthonette was kidnapped, claims that this man said he was Uncle Joe. The interesting thing here is that Anthonette actually had, and may still have, a man named Joe in her family tree. So basically she did have an Uncle Joe. Joe was actually married to Penny's sister. Law enforcement declined to name this Uncle Joe a suspect in this case because he had provided an alibi and a witness who had corroborated his alibi. At this point, investigators believe that Anthonette may be deceased, although her whereabouts remain unknown as of 2022. Theories range from her being either a victim of homicide or possibly human trafficking. Anthonette's mother, Penny, died on April 18, 1999 from a combination of liver cirrhosis and cardiac issues. She died at the young age of 46. In 2016, police stated that they believe Penny, Anthonette's mother, may have had more information than she had given police considering her daughter's disappearance, citing a failed lie detector test. And for me personally, also, a lot of details do not quite add up, and I do suspect heavily that Penny had more information about what actually happened to Anthonette, or at least about the circumstances of her disappearance. It's worth mentioning the very bizarre detail that could be potentially connected to Anthonette's disappearance, and this detail is that 3 years after Anthonette had vanished, her 25-year-old mentally challenged step-aunt, Luisa Estrada, she was Anthonette's biological father's, Larry Estrada's, sister, and she had disappeared on September 5th, 1989 from Gallup, the same town that Anthonette had disappeared 3.5 years earlier. Now, unlike Anthonette, Luisa was found alive in Juarez, Mexico 1 month later after her disappearance and was returned home. Over the years, there have been questions over potential connections between these two cases. The bizarre thing for me here is that Wikipedia claims that this woman, Luisa Estrada, had been recovered and she was found alive and well. Well, I'm not sure if she was well, but she was found alive in Juarez, Mexico. But there are sources that claim that she was never actually found. Now, when I looked at the Wikipedia, they actually have references to this information that she was actually found alive, and these references, I believe, are some sort of Albuquerque newspapers from the late 80s that I cannot actually get a hold of. So I think I just have to go with these references from the Wikipedia and assume that Luisa Estrada has been recovered. Now, it's pretty bizarre because I've tried to Googling and trying to find any information online about Luisa Estrada, Anthonette's step-aunt, but I could find nothing. However, Anthonette's case is widely discussed by web sleuths online, so personally I just found it pretty strange how this person, who also got kidnapped allegedly and was found alive in Mexico, was not reported widely on, because to me it seems that this could very likely be connected to Anthonette's disappearance, but I guess since I don't have any more information about Luisa Estrada, I have to move forward in this case. In a 2016 interview with the Albuquerque Journal, Wendy Montoya, so we know for a fact that Wendy was Anthony Montoya's daughter, and she was also Anthonette's youngest sister. Well, I think the correct wording here would be half-sister, right? She spoke of the struggles that she and her family went through after Anthonette's disappearance. She said that it just broke her whole family up. It was a very dark and dysfunctional time. Wendy revealed that she and her mother could barely talk about Anthonette without crying and then without drinking and getting high. She said that was how we coped with the pain, to numb it, not to forget about it, but to put it on the shelf, you know? The trauma of losing her sister led Wendy into a life of drug addiction, alcoholism, gang affiliation, and acquiring a criminal record throughout her adolescence into her young adulthood. Her lifestyle inevitably caused her to lose custody of her children to the state. Around 2007, Wendy successfully turned her life around. She said, "I went into rehab. I struggled to get my kids back, struggled to get away from the old person I was, to break the cycle I was raised up in, and to get far away from here, and I did it." She further added that if she could not find her sister, she could at least find herself. In June of 2022, so just this summer, Anthonette's other sister, Sadie, was interviewed by a news agency. She stated that it's hard not knowing the point of no closure, what happened, where did she go. In the interview, Sadie also publicly conveyed a message to her missing sister that she is safe, she has a family that loves her, she has sisters, we haven't given up. We all wonder and often think about Anthonette and what she's doing. Does she have kids? What kind of a life is she living? At this point of the show, as always, I would like to talk a little bit about the timeline. This week, the timeline is not that well established because there's really hard to find any concrete timestamps that I can talk about. Even some of these time points will be unverified. Let's begin the timeline. April 5th, 1986. It was a Saturday. We know that in the evening, Penny had left with friends and they went to a local bar. We know that sometime around midnight, according to Penny, she had returned home from her night out. We don't really know much about what happened next. There are conflicting reports. It's speculated that Penny had let the babysitter go home, the same babysitter that is strangely not reported on by, a lot of media outlets. And also there are conflicting reports stating that Penny actually stayed up until 3 a.m. and she spoke with Anthonette. This would be strange once more because we know that sometime during the night Anthonette was abducted, but Penny did not hear this abduction. However, Anthonette's youngest sister Wendy claims that Anthonette was at one point screaming and shouting and kicking, which is even more strange because if you take a look at the house that Anthonette and her family was living in, this is quite a small house. I don't really see how you could not hear something shouting unless Penny was actually highly intoxicated and she was passed out. It's reported that Penny is actually someone who is suffering from alcoholism. Now, let's move on to the next day, to Sunday, April 6th, 1986. Now, we, once again, are not sure, so this is an unverified timestamp that until 3 a.m., Penny and Anthonette actually stayed up late talking to each other. Now, sometime after 3 a.m., Anthonette opened the door. Afterwards, an unidentified male, and apparently there were two males here, so two males had abducted her. Now, at 7 a.m. in the morning, Penny realizes that Anthonette is missing, and by 11 a.m., after searching the neighborhood and talking to her neighbors, Penny called the police and reported her missing. I do have some questions that I want to pose, and the first question that I'm personally having in my head when I think about this disappearance case is obviously, is Penny in any capacity involved in her daughter's disappearance? So I have certain points that are pros for this theory that Penny is involved, and then I have some cons. So I would like to start with some pros that could point us to the direction, or at least to the line of thinking that maybe Penny does at the very least know something more about her daughter's disappearance. The first thing that comes to my mind is obviously, how did Penny not hear the abduction taking place? Now, I've read some Reddit comments and there's a lot of speculation that was an actual alcoholic, potentially she was involved in drug dealing, and potentially was a sex worker. Now, I could explain, I guess, this by just thinking that maybe Penny was highly intoxicated and was completely passed out and was just blacking out in her bed, and somehow she didn't hear this abduction taking place. But once again, it's still a very strange and odd detail, also given the fact that some sources claim that she was actually up until 3 a.m. talking to her daughter, which obviously could be also explained if you would think that maybe she passed out soon after she ends, talking with her daughter. Another thing is that it's speculated online, and I believe this was mentioned in the Wikipedia page as well, that Penny and Anthonette's biological father, Larry Estrada, they are said to have been connected to drug activity and were potentially selling drugs. Also, before Penny died, the police actually wanted to question her one more time, on her deathbed, about Anthonette's disappearance, but her death complicated their investigation, and I believe they couldn't get to her in time, and Penny had passed away. Police now believe that she knew more about Anthonette's abduction than she had told, as she had failed a polygraph test and reportedly made expensive purchases following Anthonette's disappearance. Another thing that's on my mind is, how did the abductors know that Anthonette would open the door? Perhaps Penny had encouraged Anthonette to open the door. Maybe there was no abduction whatsoever, and Penny, in some way or another, had managed to coach Wendy and Sadie to talk to law enforcement and portray this story of an abduction. These were a 5-year-old and the 7-year-old very easily influenceable people. If the abductors wanted to abduct one of the children from this particular household, why would they knock on a door during a night? Anthonette was attending school. Couldn't they just try to snatch her up while she was on the way or on the way back from school instead of trying to snatch her at a middle of a night? Another pro to the theory that potentially Penny had in some capacity been involved in the disappearance is the fact that I find it quite strange that Anthonette would even open the door to an Uncle Joe in the first place. It was late at night and Anthonette was very protective of her younger siblings. Would she really open a door to someone like Uncle Joe? Did she really think it was Uncle Joe? And did she really felt no fear of opening the door to this person in the middle of the night? This makes me question, did this even happen in the first place? If this did occur though, why did her youngest sister Wendy not wake up Penny immediately? We have to mention that Wendy was 5 years of age at the time, and 5-year-olds are not that coherent, I would say, but still, I think as a 5-year-old experiencing something very traumatic, I think there would be a chance that you would go straight away to your mother to report what just happened. The only con to this theory that Penny was involved in some capacity is the fact that law enforcement over the years was not able to prove any involvement, and from all accounts that I've looked into, Penny is not a criminal mastermind. Apparently she, at least it's speculated online, she was leading a dysfunctional life. She was reportedly a sex worker as well as an alcoholic. I do not have definitive proof of this, but commenters online on Reddit as well as some other sources are fairly certain that that was in fact the case. So it's a bit odd that maybe if this was some sort of a very advanced plan to potentially sell Anthonette into child slavery or human trafficking or whatnot, then I think someone like Penny would probably slip down the line. And also I've seen an episode, a back in the day episode from the early 90s of Unsolved Mysteries, where Penny did in fact give her account and did an interview on that show, and she genuinely seemed distraught and she looked like a mother who was trying to find out what happened to her daughter. So I still am not quite leaning in any way that maybe Penny actually sold Anthonette into slavery or something like that, but I do believe that she holds more information. Well, before she died, she knew more than she had initially told law enforcement. Another question in this case that I have is whether or not Anthonette was the one who called the Gallup police department 1 year after her disappearance. Now, the con for this would be that the call was actually made to the Gallup police department and not 911, and I don't think that a 10-year-old would dial Gallup police department's non-emergency phone number instead of calling 911. It seemed that the girl who was on the call, she was distraught and she was in distress, and it definitely seemed like it was an urgent matter. So calling a non-emergency phone number doesn't really make sense. On the other hand, Penny claims that the voice of the girl heard in the phone call highly resembles Anthonette, and she believes that it was in fact her daughter who made the call. Now, to put my 2 cents in it, I would like to say that I don't think it was Anthonette, because I just don't see Anthonette, a 10-year-old girl, in a very urgent manner calling Gallup Police Department's non-emergency phone number? How would she know this non-emergency phone number in the first place? And more so, if she was in Albuquerque, as she claims in the phone call, then why are you calling the Gallup Police Department? Wouldn't calling 911 to, get a hold of the Albuquerque police, wouldn't that be a smarter move? The last question for me would be that, was Anthonette actually the girl at the diner 5 years after her disappearance? The pro for that would be that the waitress thinks that she saw a girl that matched Anthonette's age progressed images. However, there is no other reason besides this to believe that this was Anthonette. This was in Las Vegas, in a different state. I don't put too much weight on this particular sighting. I would say that it was not Anthonette it's likely that it's not Anthonette who was at that diner. I personally think that Penny had more information about Anthonette's disappearance, and I wouldn't even fully rule out the theory that Penny may have returned home at 7 a.m. instead of claiming that she returned around midnight. Maybe she did return at 7 a.m. and that's when she found out that Anthonette wasn't in the house anymore. One way or another, I think it's really hard to say what actually happened to Anthonette over the years. I do hope that we will get some more information. I will sign out for this episode. Guys, hope you enjoyed, and please give your take about this case in the comment section, and I hope you will all have a wonderful rest of the day. I will see you next time.